I'm going to let the two preteens go out. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. If you don't know me, Alex sort of introduced me already. I'm Alex's dad. So that saves me having to explain that. I feel like I come here every time. I want to feel like I'm part of Dorset.
Come on.
I want to feel like I'm part of Dorset. I want to not have to introduce myself, you know what I mean? Like, just be an old face that you really recognise. And I am old. There was a sad moment. It confirmed how old I was just now. Because you know that thing where you have to put your number plate in? I was there and I was like, I need to put my number plate in. I can't see it, you know what I mean? And Rob Schick had to come along and say, old man, just step aside, tell me your registration number and I'll do it for you. That's exactly how it happened, and that confirmed that I was officially old man. I'm also eyed up by people on the tube thinking, do I need to let him sit down? So that it's fine when it's young men. When it's young women, you're like, okay, just that's the point. I don't know, but amen. I don't like the tube anyhow. So amen. So we're going to talk about God's blessing. So we're going to look at this passage in Numbers 6, verses 24 to 27. I'll flick across into the next slide in a minute, but it's a sort of passage that when I've heard this, I thought it was a bit of Church of England liturgy. Do you know what I mean? Literally, that's what I thought it was. I didn't even think this was in the Bible. I thought it was just something they did in churches. And then I've been working my way very slowly through, what do you want to call it, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, the Torah, whatever you want to call it, the first 5 books in the Bible, and I got to Numbers, and it's funny how you have a weird expectation of Numbers because it starts out with a load of numbers. Do you know what I mean? At the end of the day, and they're ridiculous numbers, actually, very high numbers. There was millions of Jews in the desert, apparently, according to Numbers. But when you read it, it's kind of like it's actually quite an action-packed book. In many ways, it's not very sort of, it's not like Leviticus, which is really interesting because it's lots of rules that really teaches a lot about God's relationship, but it's quite a lot of action in Numbers. So when you get to this part of in Numbers, you've got to remember that they've already travelled into the desert and they're at the bottom of Sinai, basically. They come out of Egypt, the Israelites have come out of Egypt, they cross the Red Sea, they're at the bottom of Sinai. Moses has been up and he's received the 10 Commandments, and he's also received all of the Levitical law that tells them exactly how they're going to worship, how they need to worship him. So, all of that stuff's taken place, but then right at the end, after all that, God gives them this blessing. And blessings are important to God.
Yes.
At the end of the day. Blessings are important to God. And so it's significant. And traditionally, this is called, how do you say it wrong? It sounds like ironic blessing. It's not ironic, but Aaronic blessing, as in Aaron, the person Aaron. But it's not Aaron's blessing at all. It's God's blessing that is passed on via Aaron, in effect. So that's the first thing to really understand. This is this is God's blessing passed on by Aaron. Oh, okay. Got that one already. So the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the Israelites. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. So they will put my name on the Israelites, and I will bless them. So we're going to go through this a little bit, first of all, then there's a couple of things I want to share in response to this blessing. Not directly, indirectly, something happened and made me think about what this blessing really means. First of all, he says, the Lord bless you. Now, the first thing to understand is the word that's translated to bless is actually about bending down, kneeling. Okay, so it could be translated as kneel or bend down, bless. And so the image here straight away is of God coming down to his people. Okay, coming down, kneeling down. Coming into their world. God blessing them is coming into their world, which is a great thing straight away, isn't it? God is willing to come down into our world. It makes me think of a time when I was in my job and I was at home and my boss needed to get something out of my drawer at work. And all I could think of was that I had a pair of shoes that I used to wear at work that I left in this drawer. And my boss, who was I like my boss a lot, her name was Bally, she's a lovely lady, but I was so embarrassed that she was going to have to go into this drawer with my shoes, do you know what I mean, and get something out of there. And it's funny, she said, where is it, whatever it was, she said, it's in my drawer, but my shoes in there. She said, that's fine. And she came back about 2 minutes later and said, mission accomplished, Tony. But I thought she had to go into another. But get into my sad little world, my shoes. You know what I mean? But God comes down, he kneels down to bless them. He comes into their world. So it says, the Lord bless you, and then it says keep you. We'll come back to keep in a minute. But the word you is important. Why is the word you important? Well, do you remember, when I was at school, the way they taught languages, you had to conjugate verbs. Do you remember that? Oh, that's how we learned it. It was like, I love, you love, he, she loves. What's the next one? I forgot what comes after we. But, sorry? We, and then it's you again, isn't it? And then it's they. Now, you is plural the second time round. This is a singular you. It's there 6 times in this passage, and is singular you. So God isn't saying you, he's saying you. It's a very personal, direct blessing. God doesn't just cast a blessing over them. He says, I'm going to bless each of you personally. And so it's intended to be taken very personally. So it's, Lord bless you and keep you. And then it says, make his face, what does it say? Make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. The word face implies this sense of lifting up and looking at, basically in a sense. Lifting up and looking at. Now, when I read this, not directly true, but when I read this passage, all I could think of, and she's gone out the room, but Rosa. One of the things about Rosa is, what do you do when you've got a child? You walk in, you pick the child up, you hold them in your arms, and you smile at them, don't you? Do you know, you look at them. Well, I do, that's what I do. I look at, and she looks at me like, who are you? But I look at her and think, you gorgeous little child. You know, it's so sad, like, I went out with some friends we went out with some friends on Friday for a meal, and they also have a grandchild. And we showed a picture of our grandchild, and they showed a picture of their grandchild, and I just thought, my grandchild's better. That was all I could think. Your grandchild's all right, but what do you want? I can't help it if Rose is beautiful. What do you want me to do? And then they started showing off about crawling and stuff like that. But amen. But thing is that there is this sheer joy in God. He's kneeled down, he's picked you up, and he's smiling at you like a father with a child. That is the image. You know, this happy God who's going to, like with a child, and he's going to bless. It says it's gracious. Today I'm here only by grace. Do you know why? Because the Thursday before last, not this Thursday, the one before that, I got a message from Roger saying, I'm looking forward to seeing you on Sunday, which was the Sunday before this, when you're doing the message. I was on the Isle of Wight, planning to celebrate my anniversary with my wife, and I completely had lost any track of the fact I was supposed to be here in Dorset. It was 6 o'clock in the morning when I looked at this message, and I remember thinking, like, there's literally nothing I can do. I am stuffed both ways. Do you know what I mean? I have two choices: to go back to Roger and say, I'm messing you around, or go back to my wife. And I was trying to work out if I could get from the Isle of Wight to Bournemouth back to the Isle of Wight again without my wife noticing. Early in the morning. It wasn't really going to happen, do you know what I mean, at the end of the day? And there was this total powerlessness. And I thought, I'm going to end up by having to say to both of them, I've messed you up. Now, Roger was saintly. He said, no worries. No worries. And I kept on looking at it. I just felt really guilty. He said, no worries, no worries. It's all good, Tony. But you know, there's a wonderfulness in grace, because grace is that point at which you have become powerless. You know that you've messed it up. And there was times when the Israelites really messed it up. But he says, I'm going to be gracious to you. You just need to be powerless, and let me be gracious to you. That's encouraging. And then he finally says, and gives you peace. Peace is that word, I think probably somebody knows, shalom. And the thing about shalom is that it's more than just a sense of I'm happy, peace, happy with myself. It's a sense of total restoration to the state you should be. You know, it's like when something goes wrong and it's fixed, there is peace. And it's beyond just being fixed. It's like it was never wrong in the first place. That is the state that God is talking to when he says peace. You know, because they've had their troubles in the desert already. Things have gone wrong. But he says, I'm going to be gracious to you and give you peace. Now, you live in a world where there's not much peace. But even if there is peace, it's often a very sort of, you know, uneasy peace, waiting to erupt again. God is saying, I'm going to restore you like it never happened, went wrong. So that's encouraging too, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? A few years ago, I remember Alex came back from Iceland. I think he'd been in Iceland with Sheila, and he brought me back a mug. Don't know what I did then. Brought me back a mug. And I really liked this mug. I like mugs anyhow. And I was drinking out my coffee, and one day I picked it up and somehow I smashed it on the side, and the handle fell off. I remember this happened to my son, actually, Zach, once when he was a kid. He got a mug at Christmas and he just broke it. First day. And I remember, it was about 2 hours after he'd opened the presents and he broke the mug. And I remember looking at it thinking, just cry, Zach. You know, these things happen, just be sad. But I remember I broke this mug and I thought, I don't want to break this mug. You know, and now Karen came back, my wife Karen came back and she said, don't worry, Tony, we'll glue it back together. And we did glue it back together. But she said, use it for pens, pencils, and things like that on your desk. Because, there was that crack was always going to be there. It was a fault line, and sooner or later it might just go again. Do you know what I mean? This piece is like the crack has gone altogether. The peace that God is giving is perfect restoration to the relationship with God we're supposed to have. So that's encouraging, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? And so when God chose those words very carefully, because he wanted his people to know how much he loves them at the end of the day. This is no casual, sometimes these are the sort of things you can repeat. This is no casual thing to repeat. This is a very special moment for the nation, because God is going to bless them. That's inspiring. So then, do you feel blessed? We really have to think that through at times. I did this, sort of talked about this a couple of weeks ago in Deep Cut, where we go to church, and at the end we went round the room. We won't have a chance to do that today, but people shared about how they felt blessed by God. And each case, it was very personal. But I want to go to that word keep, because it says when he says, Lord bless you and keep you. The interesting thing about the word keep is, again, it is about total reliance on God. So when God said he's going to keep us, it means that everything we have comes from God, and everything we need will continue to come from God. I think there's a I don't know how to explain this, but many years ago, as a Christian, back in the 90s, there was a time in the church which wasn't great for me, to be honest. There was a time in the church that wasn't great for me, and we had this thing called the revival in the church. And it was in some ways a good thing to do, because they went through everybody in the church and said, are you really committed to being part of the church? Which was a good thing to do at the end of the day. It was a really good thing to do, because there comes a moment when you're just going along, you're just sort of drifting along, you're part of the church. But at this moment in time, they said, decide almost, do you really want to be here? But one of the questions they asked, and I'm just going to say it out loud, they said, do you believe that this is the only true church? And I said, yes. I believe this is the only true church. I wish I hadn't said that. I'm actually quite ashamed that I said that. Why? Not because of the whole issue about whether it's the only true church or not. But as we think about God and us, God keeps us. Why? Because, as we look at a couple of verses, we are his people. We are God's people. But it's that way round. It's not he is our God. This word keep is about possession. God possesses us. We don't exclusively possess God, but he exclusively possesses us. That matters, because it tells us everything is about him and not about us. It's all about God and what he can bless him, not who we are, but who he is. The Psalm 100, it echoes this thought. It says, let me find it. Don't want to read off the screen if I can. So it says, make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with joyful songs. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and bless his name, for the Lord is good. We are his people. That's inspiring. Peter reflects a similar sort of thing. He says in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, he says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. And it mattered to me. I actually felt really bad, but it really mattered to me when I thought about this, in the sense of we are here to reflect God. That is what we're here for. We are here as Christians to reflect God. It's not about us owning God, it's about God owning us. We are chosen. He chose us. We didn't choose him, he chose us. Everything starts with God. Now that's really important. And then the responsibility that Christians have is uniquely to be a reflection of God. And how do we do it? And I don't know how you, and I thought, how do you do that? How do we reflect God? You know, one of the things that's clear as you read the first 5 books of the Bible and you look at what happens in the story of Exodus, is God chooses the nation of Israel. And he says, you are going to be my people, and as the world looks at you, they are going to admire you and wish they were like you. That's what it says, they wish they were like you. They might not always, sometimes it might even be scary, but they wish they were like you. And so there's this wonderful sense, of community, of a community. And I think, you know, one of the things that inspires me about your website, I looked at your website, is you describe yourself as a community church. It's a nice idea, it's a really nice idea being a community church, but it's even more important that the church is in itself a community with a loyalty to each other and built on its relationship with God. So again, I started to think about, you know, like, where do you see real community in the world today? I'm trying to think, where do you see a real community in the world today? We have the notion of community, but does it really exist? Do you know what I think? I started to think it's bizarre in some ways. One example is in football fans. Do you know what I mean? It's interesting with football fans. I've thought about this a lot because I have a friend who is a very good Manchester United fan. He's a very big Manchester United fan. But the one thing you know about my friend is because he's a Manchester United fan, when there's a game, if Manchester United score a goal and it's counted as offside, it wasn't offside. Because he's a Manchester United fan, and so Manchester United are never offside. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I am loyal. If there's a disputed decision, he sees it their way. Everything is Manchester United are right and good. and the rest of the world, da-da-da. Do you know what I mean? It's this intense sense of loyalty. Now, that may not be a good example, but in a sense, the church needs to have that same sense of community. That intense loyalty to each other. But more importantly, that intense loyalty to God. You know, and it's funny, like, you know, sometimes I think, again, you can lose it. It becomes about us and not about God.